Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of Courage Talks. Today, the special guest is Jafar Ismail. Jafar has a pretty bold achievement, which very few guests in this episode would have even imagined doing it. He scaled the Mount Everest. And I think, anything about him less than that, anything else will sound much less. I'll let Jafar complete the introduction. Welcome, Jafar.
Thank you, Hetal. Thank you for having me here. As you said, yes, I climbed Mount Everest this May. Actually, May 19, 2024 at 7:24 a.m., I reached the summit of Mount Everest. And I'll start off by saying that, yes, although it was an achievement, it was someplace that the highest I've ever been. But my experience there, it was more of a humbling experience because Mount Everest is truly mesmerizing. The locals worship the mountain. They call it Sagar Mata. And if there is anything at least most of us mere mortals will come close to witnessing one of the best creations of God, that is definitely one of it for me. And for me, it was also more humbling because I knew when I got there that it was not just me, it was not my own achievement. Several factors that aligned themselves in order for me to, set my feet on top of the summit. So in that sense, it was more of I did not feel it was like a personal achievement, but almost like a gift from God and the mountain that allowed me to set foot on it.
Wow, gift from God. That's a nice way to describe it in a very humbling way. And the spontaneity which you remembered, May 19, 7:24 a.m., it looks like your watch stopped at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. Because, it was one of the hardest climbs that I had done. In fact, all the way getting up to starting from base camp, although I think we'll cover that in more detail. But
right.
It was one of the hardest climbs that I've done physically. And mentally, It was very taxing because after spending so much time away, it was almost like close to 7 weeks that I was away from my family. That when I left home, and when we started the climb, the final climb from the base camp, left the base camp, and everybody who goes to mountain, knows for sure there is a chance you may not return. And there was not going to be any contact with the family or friends or anybody when you leave the base camp. So it was mentally very taxing. So when you finally reach the summit, and of course, go through the various camps, various stages, and once you finally get to the summit, when the whole realization comes about that, all your struggles are now complete, as they say, they're halfway complete. Turning back, the return back, that's the more important part.
Right.
But it's like a big relief, yes, you've finally done it.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions on that, but I'll come back to that later. But so Courage Talks is all about courage. The story is my book, Against All Odds, which my father's biography. And the reason I wrote that book is because my father had exceptional moments of courage in his daily life, in his regular life. He encountered a lot of challenges and he came out strong. And the whole idea is to bring out stories of courage among other people as well. So what does courage mean to you? What comes to your mind when we talk about courage?
I would say courage is being very cautiously afraid of some things, because that is when you have to make a very conscious decision. Courage is not going forward against all odds and all, because yes, that's in some cases, that may apply. But in most of our day-to-day life, being courageous means making a choice whether to move forward or to turn back.
Okay. That's very well put, I guess. I mean, normally people jump and say, oh, courage is being brave, right? But you're saying the entire decision-making process, right? When you involve yourself in that situation, you itself are taking that big, bold step forward as well.
Exactly. Yeah, there may be some extreme situations where you will put yourself in the harm's way. But in order to, you have a child, you want a dog attacking a child, you put yourself in the harm's way, you get injured and save the child. But that's a decision you make at that point. So that is definitely a definition of courage. A mom that protects the child against any danger. That's definitely that's the final act of courage. But in most of our day-to-day life, courage means evaluating the circumstances and making a decision whether to move forward or to turn back. And it's evaluating the odds and making the decision.
Very interesting. Makes sense. So we know what you achieved recently, but how was Jafar as a kid? Were you adventurous as a kid? Were you naughty?
Yeah, my father used to say, I was very prone to accidents. I have not known a single year where I was not in bandages or, had some stitches or something. So I would get into lots of accidents. My father was in the Indian Air Force. So I grew up being an Air Force brat, and that's the only life I knew until I finished high school and time to go to college. So grew up, of course, being in the Air Force, went to Kendriya Vidyalayas, central school kid. And in my college days, yes, I was interested in sports, not very good at it. Played cricket, volleyball, again, I was not very good in the sports. And athletics also, I was pretty mediocre growing up. But when I went to college, I went to the Marine Engineering College in Calcutta, also known as DMET. So that's when, I took an active interest in running. I started running. And And that was one sport that, you could do it by yourself, although you could do it as part of the group, or you could do it by yourself. And it kind of took that up. And I kept running on and off all my life so far. Just, that was my life growing up.
Any particular incident from your childhood days that you remember? Anything which your kids might not know about?
Now they know everything about me because, they're getting older, they're asking questions.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, things that I mostly remember were like, breaking bones, breaking a leg, falling off the bike, getting bitten by a snake, receiving a welcome back. My father was stationed in Air Force Station Tambaram in Madras, or currently Chennai.
Yeah.
So one evening I had gone out, like I'm sure, many kids who grew up in the 70s, the rules of the house used to be get home before dark. We didn't have watches or iPhones back then. The rule of almost every household was, you have to be home before dark. So you're out playing, got late, and coming back, I stepped on a snake, got bitten by it. And Tambaram was pretty far away from any hospitals and all. So it was poisonous because by the time they took me to the MI room, which is like the emergency hospital, I was losing my sight. So that was one of the memories. And the best part of it was, coming back from the hospital and going on my first day back to school was like I received the hero's welcome.
You were a hero in many people's eyes. You survived a snake bite.
After a snake bite, yeah.
That's interesting.
You can say I was hero because of the reflected glory of other people.
You're the first guest on Courage Talks officially to have survived a snake bite. I'll give you that credit for that. But when it comes to courage, any role models, anyone you look up at, anyone who inspired you, someone you always admired for their courage?
Like many kids, my father was my hero.
Okay.
Always, his advice, his things, what he did in his life, his struggles that he grew up in. I mean, our parents who grew up in post-independent India, the struggles they face, our experiences pale in comparison to what the struggles that they face.
That's true. Yeah.
Because India as a country was forming and it went through very difficult times. So I would say my father has been my biggest hero in my life and all my life. He passed away 15 years ago. And one of the things that I always miss about him is whenever after any achievement, anything that I did or anything I wanted, he was the first person that I would go and inform. Hey, Dad, I did this. Or I passed this exam. I did this, achieved this. That's one thing that I feel like, is missing from my life now, that I don't have him to go and say that I've done this.
That's true.
Because his approval meant a lot to me at that point. He was very encouraging in anything that I did.
Yeah. Anything about your dad which you remember, anything which stands out as an example of his, any incident? Being in Air Force, I'm sure he would have a lot of kisses to tell.
He was not a fighter pilot, so like most of the people think, but he was in the administrative staff. And one of the incidents that I, as a child, that I still remember is like we were in Degaru, Assam, and we had gone to see the rhinos. There's lots of rhinos, and I remember falling off the thing. There was a ditch there, like you could see the rhinos there, and I fell off. And one thing I remember is my father jumping from the ditch just there. So that's one of the big memories. Like see the picture of my dad. That one tiny instant, like him against the sky, like behind him was the sky, and him jumping over to get me. I was maybe 4-year-old.
I'm sure your kids would have a laugh on that.
Oh yeah, that too. And a couple of incidents, like, my dad, when I was in college in Bombay, DMET, 1 year of was in Bombay. I had an accident. I was pretty much banged up and all that. And suddenly I get this letter from my dad, like a telegram or something. Hey, he was passing by and he's coming to visit me. And I'm like, oh my God, like showing up at my door. And I'm trying not to limp, like, I'm trying to walk normally. But the first thing he asked me, what happened to your leg? Like,
yeah. Yeah. When you're away from your parents, you don't want to tell them about these incidents or accidents. You don't want them to needlessly worried about it, right? Or
the incident over which my leg was hurt was over a very stupid thing that, somebody, it was just like a weekend Saturday or so, something, somebody was saying, hey, can you scale this wall from the outside, like go up to the second floor? I was like, yeah, sure, I can do it. And I tried, like looked at it and I started climbing, got to the second floor window. The ledge actually broke. I held on to the ledge and it broke and I fell all the way down.
That's very interesting. You obviously, we'll come to the mountaineering part, but you have dabbled with running as well. And you mentioned that the New York Marathon, which is among the 6 world majors, was on your bucket list for some 11 years. And so what took you so much time to really get down to achieving that milestone?
So I was actually running just for recreation and fun and health reasons, just to stay fit. But then in 2012, a friend of mine, he's from my same alma mater, from DMED, a junior of mine, we met, and one day he said, like, he's running the half marathon and asked me to come along with him. We ran the Danbury, Connecticut half marathon here. And when we were running, I finished the run. Like, he told me, just keep running. You might take about 2.5 hours to finish it, and that's fine. But, I kept running, never looked at the watch. But when I was approaching the finish finish line, I saw it was 1 hour, 58 minutes. I said, oh my God, that's something. So I sprinted the rest of the way. So finishing my first half marathon under 2 hours was pretty encouraging. And yes, I felt like, yes, I've done something. And then the next thing I wanted to do was, run the full marathon. However, one of the things that was, maybe I was not doing it correctly. I was not training myself. I would injure myself. Every half marathon, if I were to go out, run 5 miles, I would either injure my knee, my calf, some injury or other was happening. And so that's why it was only, I never ran beyond half marathon. It was during COVID. That's when, a lot of my friends who had started running after me, but they had run many marathons. It was then I decided, 2021, December, I think we took a vacation, came back, and I said, you know what, 2023, I'm going to run the New York City Marathon. And over here, we have to, in order to get a guaranteed entry, you have to run like 9 New York Road Runner races and volunteer one time and you get a guaranteed. So I went through that, and then the year came, 2023 came about, and actually I had gone to climb Mount Aconcagua also, because I was also, taking part in mountaineering, climbing mountains. So at Mount Aconcagua, I climbed that mountain with Nim Spurgeon. If you've seen the documentary 14 Peaks, he's on him. He made it, and it's on him. It says, so I climbed with him, and that's when I met a lot of people who had climbed Mount Everest. So I'll come back to that. Some time ago, I had made a decision that I'll probably never climb Mount Everest. But when I met so many people who had already scaled the mountain, I said, you know what, it is doable, and maybe the time is now. I should not procrastinate it. So last year, in 2023, March, I made the decision that, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. And then had also signed up for the New York City Marathon. And I wanted to I wanted to finish the race without injuring myself. And so I actually, I met a coach here. He's a U.S. Athletic Federation coach. And I see him around town, training a lot of people. So I told him I would like to run the New York City Marathon. My goal is to finish without injury. So he basically gave me a very structured program, and I was very surprised that I ran the race and I was walking normally. I was not, yes, I was sore, but I was very happy that, I completed the race without any injury. My first 4 hours, 51 minutes or something.
Right. And I believe your family was there, and it was a very special moment for you to see your family at the finish line.
Yes, that was definitely, New York City, because there are almost 300,000 people around at the park, so you don't see them at the finish line. You have to still completely finish the race. You have to at least walk a mile before you see your family. But I knew my family was waiting for me at mile 20, because that's where some of my friends were. And then my son actually was waiting for me at mile 12, where he was with his friends. So I met them, and then that kept me going. Like, at mile 16, I did suffer some cramps on the New York City. I still remember that it was on the bridge. I had this bad cramp, so I stopped for about 5 minutes. This state put, had some salt tablets, and then I continued on. But getting to mile 20, that was my target. I have to get to mile 20 because my family is there. So I got to mile 20, and after that, a friend of mine was also there. So he gave me some Advils and some more salt tablets. And I guess that re-energized me. My cramp went away, and I finished the rest of the marathon. But having a family around and the cheers. New York City has a slogan like, it will move you. Energy crowd is such that, the crowd carries you.
That's true. I've done 3 world majors, and that's been one thing which resonates. The support from the crowd is just mind-blowing, right? You're like, what's motivating these guys to come up in like thousands and be there just to cheer the runners, right? We are there because we got a purpose, right? We're running for the medal, but what are you standing there for? You're not getting a medal for standing there and cheering.
Yes, definitely.
That's true. But, as a runner, I can say, of course, running has been quite transformational for me. I've learned a lot of things about myself, about the sport, about other people who are runners as well. What has been impactful as far as running is concerned for you, right? What is your takeaway from running as a sport?
Oh, well, running, I feel like, it can be many things at the same time. It can be your fitness journey. People have achieved things. And yes, there are people that are competitive runners, and there are super athletes and who compete for these races. They get big prize money, big purse at the end. But for the most people, it's about finding themselves. There are some people who've told me it is meditative, and I can relate with that, because some of my best thoughts have come to be when I'm running. Some of the, when you're running and you're thinking about something, and suddenly you get some good ideas when you're running. So I would say it's meditative. It's you feel the outlook changes at the end of the run. You could be stressed out from work or something, just go for a run, come back, and you are refreshed. And so it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but for me it has been more of a transformative journey in the sense that, number one, it, physically you're getting better. That's something that's, that. And yes, and the other thing is a sense of accomplishment that you get when you've completed your run, and of course mental benefits from running.
Yeah, very interesting. And coming to your climbing, right? I mean, what prompted you to start climbing?
Same
Yeah.
friend that got me running, his name is
Mhm.
Bala, and he was actually 2011 was when he told us that he's planning a trip to Mount Kilimanjaro.
Okay.
And 2011 was I knew this trip was happening, and 20 that's when I said, you know what, I'll join that team as well.
Mhm.
So that was the first time I ever went outdoors on such a long hike, and and a mountain climb also. And again, something this has always been on my bucket list, at least when you saw some movies or open up National Geographic and you see all these expeditions. It had been on my bucket list, but climbing Mount Kilimanjaro really brought about my love for the mountains.
Mhm.
I did not know that I would really enjoy it that much. And then one of the things that I learned about myself was, hey, I acclimatized quite well to the altitude. Most of the people were taking Diamox or the altitude
Yeah.
pills. I carried the pills with me, but I didn't take it, and
Mm.
I kind of, because we were going up in altitude gradually, but I
Yeah.
felt like, I did not need it. I was not getting altitude sickness. And so that's something I said, what, hey, maybe this is like, again, God's gift to me. And then I said, you know what? So after that, I kept mountaineering. We would either go on some climbs or something. Every year we did something, either
Yeah.
local climbs out here. The other big mountain that I climbed after Kilimanjaro was Mount Elbrus in Russia. This
Okay.
is back in 2018. Until then, it had been one of the very tough climbs because climbing a glacier is totally different experience. And although in terms of altitude, it's only 18,500 feet, it's not as tall as Kilimanjaro at that point.
Right.
But it was still, it was one of the very tough climbs, and that too, going to Russia was also a big experience for us. So, and then in 2020, we, with the same friends, same group of friends, we went to the Everest Base Camp trek.
Right.
And after the Everest Base Camp, we climbed a mountain that's Labuche, which is like
Mhm.
at 6,000 meters, almost
Right.
20,000 feet. So, I mean, in Nepal and surrounding areas in the Himalayas region, that 6,000 meters is nothing. Like there are maybe 4,000 mountains taller than 6,000 meters. But in the
Yeah.
rest of the world, it's a big thing. So I climbed that mountain, and again, I felt like one of the things that I was checking myself was, how I adapt to altitude. And I did not take any altitude sickness pills, and 6,000 meters, I was fine. And so this was 2019, but I'm getting to the Everest Base Camp, looking at Everest. That's when, I thought like, probably I'll never do Everest in my life because, I was getting old, and I said, you know what? Probably this is the closest that I'll come to. I was probably like, 3, 4, 5 miles away from Everest. And I said, this is it. So I
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
back, didn't give
Mm.
it another thought until I climbed Mount Aconcagua, which is at 7,000 meters. Outside of Asia, it's the highest mountain. And that too,
Mm.
I saw an ad on Facebook that, hey, want to climb Mount Aconcagua with Nirmal Pooja. And so I just sent an email, and they sent me back a questionnaire. So I replied to it, and then they invited me to the team. And there was a team
Mhm.
of 16 people that climbed with him, and I think 15 out of 16 summited Mount Aconcagua.
Oh,
And
that's
that mountain is also, it's known as the Mountain of Death.
uh-huh.
So,
What's the reason for that?
and because the casualty rate is pretty high,
Okay.
and it is known as the Mountain of Death because a lot of people, although it's only 7,000 meters, one of the things about that mountain, which is pretty unique, is because of the high winds, it gets very, very cold. Typical temperature is like, minus 30, minus 35, which is the same temperature that you'll find on Everest and K2s. And because of the high winds, snow does not stick to the mountain. It's very rocky.
Okay.
So after you cross a certain altitude, it's very rare to find snow, even though it snows a lot, but it gets blown away because of the wind. So because of the
Got it.
wind and altitude and the cold, a lot of people, success rate is like, less than 33%.
Mhm.
And that too, people do not, the mountain is not open for climbing in the winter months.
Oh, yeah. True.
People do it, but they do so on their own risk. And that one night, I did come back with a bit of a frostbite. My ear was like literally, hat had moved because of the wind. I didn't realize it then, but the next morning, it was one of the I had a very painful ear, and it was like almost like a boil on the top of the ear. So did have some frostbite issues.
Mhm.
But, coming back from that mountain was, that's when I felt like, yes, I had achieved something. And meeting so many people who had already done Everest was actually was the reason I decided that maybe Everest is now within reach and I should be able to do
Right.
it.
Very interesting. And I know Everest requires multiple peaks to be done. The difficulty nature of Aconcagua made it easier for you to just jump, leapfrog, and straight away go for the Everest plan. So, how did the Everest plan materialize? Who did you plan to go with? Did you have a buddy with you, or did you just make friends on the way, or how did it all happen?
Yeah. So after I made my decision to climb Mount Everest, I spoke to my friends. My friends were, they all are in different stations in life. Most of the people, because the kids are growing up, they don't want to, some people cannot take the time off because it does require a lot of time commitment, at least 8 weeks away from home. So my friends did not want to do it. And my other friends, they wanted to do other 8,000 meters before attempting Mount Everest. But I don't want to wait that long. I said, you know what, let me just give it a shot and see if I'm able to do it. I'll do it. If not, it's okay. I'll accept it. So none of my friends came with me, but I did, because of my climbing experience. I knew some people who had climbed mountains in Nepal, done the Annapurna trek, the Everest Base Camp treks. That's the operator that we used, earthbound expeditions, and we got to know the owner quite well. And so I asked him, what would it take to climb Mount Everest? He does not run those expeditions himself, but his close friend runs Satori Adventures. So that's a different company. So he put me in touch with Rishi Bandari, that's his name, and basically handles expeditions to Everest, and of course, like many other peaks in Nepal. So he introduced me to him, and then one thing led to the other. So once I signed up with that, I met most of the team of 8, the rest of the team of 8 people, including me, when we got to Nepal. So there were 4 from the US and 4 from Poland. So there were 8 in our team.
Nice. And all of you submitted?
No, 5 of us submitted. 3 of us turned back. So 2 other Americans, 2 other guys from America. One guy had some kind of medical issues, Camp 2. So in our rotations, when we went up to Camp 2, he was a very strong climber, though, up until that. But he had some oxygen level went down, so he was evacuated. And that's when he told me that he had some kind of pre-existing heart condition as well. So expedition was over for him. He was turned back. Another guy had some. He was a younger guy, very strong climber, but he had some. While we were navigating the Khumbu Glacier, he did not even come to Camp 2. But before that, he had some. He turned back and he went back to the hospital in Kathmandu, and from there he went back home. And then from the Polish team, there were 2 people who actually had bad Khumbu cough. Is a very, very dry cough. It's very painful and painful to hear, painful to experience. So they were both in the hospital. They were both advised not to continue the climb, but one of them came back and they climbed. So there were 3 Polish guys and 2 guys from the US who climbed from our team, who successfully climbed.
Awesome. Talking about climbing back, you had some climbing back experiences yourself where you had to give up the climb. What was the experience like, and what was the feeling that went through when you decided to do that?
You mean coming back from the summit, descending?
Yeah, not being able to attempt and having to come back.
Yeah. So when I went to, this was my first experience wearing the oxygen mask, because after 7,000 meters on Everest, the air is so thin that 99% of the people use supplemental oxygen. And the people who climb without oxygen, they go through some specialized training before they do so. So I think for me, what was happening, and we climb at night. So when we left at Camp 4, we started the climb. So the mask was not fitting well, and some of the oxygen was seeping out from my nostrils, from the sides. And air gets cold. So that cold oxygen was blowing up. I was getting very cold. So I was trying to avoid that. What happened by morning when we were approaching the summit was I could not see. My vision was getting very blurry. So when I got to the summit, I felt like, hey, it's foggy all around. So when I asked my Sherpa, hey, are you able to see? He says, yeah, it's foggy, but I'm able to see. But for me, it was very blurry vision. And that got me very scared on how I am going to come back, because right before the summit of Everest, there's a place called the Hillary Step, and that is one of the most dangerous places of the trek. Many of the accidents have happened right on the Hillary Step. So coming back down without being able to see was very worrisome, and I was very worried. And that's when I felt like, hey, I need to take charge of the situation myself. I had 2 Sherpas with me at that time, Dorje and Sham. So I told them, guys, listen, here's my condition. I'm not able to see. So for me, what you see, if you see a step down or something, for me, all I see is white. So when I'm walking down, I need one of you guys just to tell me if I'm putting my foot on because I'm going to be, of course, you have tethered to the rope, you have the safety line, you're coming down. But I said, you have to tell me that I'm not putting my foot at the wrong place. If there's a hole somewhere, or if I'm off the mountain, you have to tell me because I cannot see where I'm putting my foot in. So there were many places coming down the mountain. The Sherpa in front of me, would actually caught hold of my foot and placed it where I should be placing. The path was so narrow, and you are literally walking on this narrow ledge, which could be maybe 6 inch wide. Your rope anchor is on the side, and on the one side, on coming down, the slope is on your right. It's like there's a 8,000 feet drop right into somewhere in Tibet, probably. So that was and in fact, so that was the part. And once we came down Hillary Step, coming down the rest of the mountain was, even though I was not able to see, what I did was I started rappelling down from the safety line, and I told the Sherpa, just tell me in the back, because I was not able to see anyway. So I had to sort of climb down blind. He was telling me move to the left, move to the right. So I was able to rappel down. About 4 or 5 hours later, my vision got, okay enough for me to, come down myself. By the time I came down in about 8 or 9 hours, my vision was like about 75%. So that was okay. But then I later found out that actually this blurriness was a result of snow blindness. So it's a temporary condition in most cases. Yeah, in most severe cases, you can lose your sight too. But in my case, it was a mild case of snow blindness, and it took about a couple of weeks for my eyes to get better, become normal.
Yeah, I think that was I don't call it an escape, but I think that was a pretty sensitive situation to be in, because what I've heard is there are more deaths which happen on the way down rather than going up.
Yes, and the reason for that is manifold, because when you're going up, there is a condition that every climber goes through, which is called the summit fever. It's your desire to achieve your goal. It's almost like a fever that it wants to, and it propels you to go up. And also the adrenaline rush it is in climbing that you get, that puts you. But once you reach the summit, your energy is all drained. You've been climbing 9, 12 hours, which is typical. 9 to 12 hours is typical to climb up. Your energy is drained. You have not eaten. You barely eat anything. And at that altitude, your digestive system is also not working to its fullest. So whatever you eat is probably undigested. So it's not, your energy is gone. And your attention span, you're not that attentive on the way down. So that's what causes most accident. In fact, 2 days after I summited on May 21st this year, right on the Hillary Step, the cornice, which is the ledge that on people walk by, and it's only one row. You can either descend or ascend that part. The cornice broke and 6 climbers fell, and 4 of them were probably on the safety and they rescued themselves. But 2 climbers, one British climber and his Sherpa, they fell and they were never found.
That's very unfortunate.
And so that and then 2 days before we summited, actually before we left, we found out that there were 2 Mongolian climbers who were climbing solo, meaning without any Sherpa's help. They died right on the Hillary Step.
Oh man, that's quite a tough thing to see deaths at such close quarters, right? I mean, you were there the very next day at the same place.
Yeah, it is quite tough, and not being, it's quite tough, knowing that he has somebody like you, probably, who knows, probably way better climber than you, or has not been able to summit, is there forever.
I think that's the toughest part of these climbs, that nature is not distinguishing a good climber versus a bad climber, right? Yes. To your best of your efforts, you might have got all checks in place, and it still might not work for you, right? I mean, that's what I've heard. That's why it's called the most gruesome sport, right? It does not distinguish, right? I mean, it's not giving you a punishment for
very unforgiving.
I think so, right?
The mountain is very unforgiving because the human body compared to the nature force, there's no comparison between the human body and the force of nature. The nature can unleash such a force that human body can extinguish just like this. And the cold, the wind, the altitude, all these factors come around, and people that have the stories that you have read about all the people, some very good climbers who were not able to return, or because of that, because it's the nature, the conditions the mountains created were such that, that they were not able to survive that.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's why it's also called the death zone.
Yeah, I've heard that.
So altitude above 8,000 meters is known as the death zone. And the reason it is known as the death zone is because they say that the body cells do not regenerate. So if somebody were to go into death zone, they say the factor of safety is the maximum you can stay out in death zone is 48 hours, even with supplemental oxygen, because your body is slowly dying.
Yeah.
That's why in Everest, they say from Camp 4, going up to the summit and coming back, you should do so. To be safe, you should do it within 24 hours. You should be back down. And in my case, going up took me about 11 and a half hours. We left around a little after 8 p.m. And next morning, 7:24, I was there. And then coming back down, because of my eye condition, my descent was quite slow for the first 4 or 5 hours. And at the end of that, we were hit with a storm, and it just came out of the blue. It got very windy and snow started falling. For about half an hour, we just hunkered down, stayed put at one place. And we all had our back to the wind. And even with our summit suit, my back was, I felt felt like, it was frozen solid.
Okay.
And then in that half an hour, about a foot of snow fell, and it was very cold. But then after that, temperature normalized, it got a little warmer, and we were able to continue our descent at that point.
Everything is relative, right?
Everything is relative. Yeah, that's so true.
Warmer doesn't mean that it was nice and quiet and you just walk down.
It was warm enough for us to continue
Yeah.
because the temperature there, it's like such an extreme, like minus 40. I mean, minus 40 Celsius or Fahrenheit. It's about the same. It's at the same point.
Right.
It is unbelievable, like how it's, and what is surprising is your body's ability to kind of, even though yes, you're wearing your warm clothes, no part of your skin is exposed, everything is covered.
Right.
But the thing is, your body adapts, like in those conditions, and
That's
then
true.
once it gets to, let's say, minus 20, you feel like, yeah, it's comfortable now.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned one of the climbs your son had joined with you. How was that experience like?
Actually, yeah, I've had several climbs with my son, but my most recent climb was with my son. He's 26 now. When I came back from Everest, my kids were two of my sons were going to Mount Chimborazo. It's in Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
So my sons were always asking me when I was in Nepal, hey dad, will you join us for this climb? I did not want. I said, you know what, let's see. Once I finish this and when I come back home, we'll decide. So after I finished my Everest climb, on the way back, I told my sons, okay, sure, I'll join you guys. So I joined the same team, even though it was kind of late. So I joined the team. So my son and I, we climbed Mount Chimborazo. Of course, my son was younger, stronger, and a better climber. He got there like 45 minutes before me, and he waited for me to get there. So we climbed. But the first mountain that I climbed with my son was Mount Labuche back in 2019 when we did the Everest Base Camp trek.
He was there with you.
After that, we climbed Mount. He was there with me. He was only 14 at that time, and that was my youngest son. And that was one other thing. I told my son, you know what? Anytime you want to turn around, just let me know, and I'll come back with me. There were about 4 other people besides me. There were 4 other people. One of them was Sonia Ahuja, I think, who's been your guest as well, and another friend of mine, Bala, and 2 other friends. They turned back. One of my friends, Suja, and her son were with us, but they turned back halfway, and 4 of us, we continued. So one of the best things was, when I got to the summit, my son was like right behind me, and he got to the summit like a few minutes after me. And I guess, being at 20,000 feet and not, it was a pretty overwhelming experience finding my 14-year-old with me right there. With me. One thing what he told me afterwards was, Dad, there were many times I wanted to turn back, but I knew if I turned back, you would also do the same. So that's why I did that.
That's so sweet of him. And it's interesting, right? I mean, you described about 2 climbs. One was the Everest, where you had no contact with the family, and your own son is there with you, and he's at age 14 and giving you that company to go there. I'm sure either of them or maybe both of them are planning the Everest now that you have climbed it as well.
Definitely. My advice to them or anybody else who's doing it is like, try to go on because one of the things that I felt in Everest is loneliness. Even though there are hundreds of climbers with you, the Sherpas with you, I definitely knew that, nobody out there would, risk their life for me, or I wouldn't risk my life for anybody else, because
in fact, it's not advised as well, right? It is advised as well that, you could be actually endangering yourself while you're trying to save someone.
Yes.
So it's like both of you will die rather than one person alone dying.
Both of you. Trying to help somebody is a very, very difficult decision because your own safety is on the line. I can relate to 2 incidents. In fact, on the climb up, one thing I saw, I looked at this guy who had absolutely no energy. He had just stopped by and there were like 4 or 5 people around him. And I kind of looked into his eyes. His eyes had this very blank look on his face. He had no energy to continue on. He didn't even have the energy to turn back, come down. He was just lying there and with a very blank look. I'm sure his Sherpas would have helped him down, and he came down. That was one. And the other was continuing up. Found this guy, he was right before us and he was just yelling. He was calling out some Kenji, Kenji. That was so, I didn't know what he was doing. So, and the Sherpa with me, it's just one rope and we are on this very almost nearly vertical climb. So we had to go around him. It's a very difficult thing at that altitude to be able to take your safety around, put it around him, and then climb over him and then continue on. So I asked my Sherpa, Shyam, what's this guy? He says, no, just continue. Come on, upar aajo. So we passed him. There's another Sherpa with me, Dorje. I asked Dorje again, Dorje, what's his problem? Like, why is he yelling so much? So Dorje looked at him and says, oh, his oxygen is out. So I said, oh my God, what do you, he ran out of oxygen. So I said, what do you do? And the guy's like literally yelling. This is, oh no, he's from the 7 summits. So once we got up to, right after some time, like climbing another 10 meters or so, there was a place where we could rest for a bit.
Yeah.
And that's where my Sherpa, Dorje, he told the other Sherpa from 7 summits, from a different group, hey, that you have one of your climbers. So those 2 or 3 people went down, brought him up, changed his.
So the person from that group is going to go and help him out.
Yeah, exactly. So, but even when you're changing your oxygen mask tank, you take the mask off, and for a minute or so, you're without the supplemental oxygen, you can feel the effects. You can feel that, you're asphyxiating, almost like it's not a very pleasant feeling. Panic can set in anytime. And so all these incidents, if people need to be very prepared, and so that's why my advice to people is, go with somebody who really cares for you, go with a buddy, go with your sibling, go with somebody who will say, you know what, hell with the summit, I'm going to do something for you. And you will be in a position to do the same thing for them. I'll take care of you. So, because that kind of care can only come from somebody who's very close to you.
Of course. No doubt about that. That's true. And, listeners must be wondering that, you do only running and mountaineering, but you obviously have a full-time job as well, right? So how did you balance your professional life while you were indulging in so much of running and climbing, being away from your work for weeks together? How did you manage it out and how did you balance it out?
So back in India, I was in the merchant navy. I did my marine engineering, so I sailed. When I came to the US, like most of the people who came here in the 90s, switched my career. I was in IT, worked for many technology companies from AT&T, Converse, then in the financial companies. So, but then my wife, who's an entrepreneur, she started a business. She started actually a restaurant in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And the restaurant became quite popular. And in 2020, we started the process of franchising it. 2022 was when I quit my job to focus on helping our franchise grow. So that answers the question. Being self-employed, being your own boss gives you the flexibility to take the time off to plan. And then I had a year to plan to be away because I knew I was going to be away for almost 2 months. That allows you the flexibility to stay away from your work for so long. Otherwise, people who have jobs need to have a very understanding boss to be able to get away for like 8 weeks.
Right. That's true. That makes sense. For a lot of people, Mount Everest climb would be on top of the bucket list, right? That's something which they would want to ultimately achieve, right? That's probably the hardest task for them in life, right? And you got 2-3 decades ahead of you, right? So what's your next big adventure on your bucket list?
Well, now that I've done Mount Everest, I feel that the 7 summits is kind of within reach now.
Okay.
So I am thinking of climbing Mount Denali maybe next year or the year after, but definitely I'd like to do Denali. And then after that, it'll be Mount Vinson, which is, again, because I feel that, after doing Mount Everest, these are now within reach. Although, I do have lots of things in my bucket list that I want to do, but I don't know, whenever the opportunity presents itself. But one thing is for sure, I'll probably keep doing something or other. I haven't planned out my 2025 calendar year yet. I will do at least 1 or 2 marathons.
Which is the next one you're looking at? Which is the one you're aspiring for from a marathon perspective?
From the marathon perspective, okay, another thing is Istanbul Marathon came about because my wife and my friend, my friend Bala, who runs this Runners High with Bala, running. They started this thing about having a marathon vacations. So they want to combine running with a vacation. So what we did, Istanbul Marathon was just that, run the Istanbul Marathon and spend some time in Turkey, take a vacation in Turkey. So the next one that they're looking for to do is one in Norway. It's in Tromsø, Norway. It's a midnight marathon. So the race starts around 10 p.m. and you're literally running under the sun at midnight.
Wow. Very interesting.
So that is going to be in June. So we are still preparing for it. And other than that, I'd probably run another marathon towards the end of the year.
Got it. Anything other than climbing and running which would feature in your bucket list?
Well, I did this year itself. I did my first Olympic triathlon. This is my another son. I have 5 kids, by the way. So my mother's son. So he was, when I came back, July 4th or something, we were together and he says, my son comes up to, Baba, do you want to do the New Jersey State Triathlon? It's only the Olympic. So fortunately, I have been a good swimmer. I knew how to swim, and that is the most difficult part for people to try the triathlon.
A lot of people, they don't know swimming and they stay away from
let me just see if I can do the 1500, because I had not swum for like couple of years. So went to the pool and did a 1500 meter swim. I said, this is doable. 40 minutes, we've done it. So so we signed up for it. Both of us did.
Yeah.
Did not have any formal training, but since we have
Yeah.
done, we had run, and I would also bike on and off.
Yeah.
So did my first triathlon. So that's another thing that, I'd like to do is like, maybe complete an Ironman someday. But
Yeah.
that would require, of course, I can't just go do it like I did the Olympic triathlon.
But
That would
yeah.
require definitely require some training.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Makes sense. Now, it's been an interesting journey, Jafar. I think you got us through some very tough and interesting aspects and instances of your climb as well. And it's interesting to hear that you are giving equal importance to running as well, because, for me, being a runner, I mean, I did the EBC trek in 2019 and I met Rommel on the way back, who had just summited after that. And since then, doing the summit has been on my mind. I like somewhere, sometime in the future, I'll do it. But from 2019 onwards, I've not done a single trek just because too many of my running plans and too many of my Ironman plans keep coming in, and I somehow feel that I'm not able to mix the two. Right? If I go for a trek and if I injure myself, I would not be able to run the run which I have planned, and so on and so forth. So I want to keep my calendar completely free when I go for a trek, knowing the fact that anything can happen. I might be lying on a bed for next 6 months or whatever. So I don't want to sign up. But it's amazing that you've been able to. I mean, you come back from an Everest summit climb and you're going with your son for another trekking. It's quite inspiring, I would say. Here's where the podcast turns interesting, and I switch the mic. What's the question that you have for me?
Well, my question to you is like, how do you would tell me about your journey, your Ironman journey? Like, doing an Ironman is like, of course, the name itself, Ironman, is like, something superhuman. Sounds like something superhuman. Many of my friends have done it.
Yeah.
It has been like it's almost like preparing for a pilgrimage. Like for 6 months, you don't see them. They're training or sleeping. That's all working. So
Yeah.
tell me about your journey, because how do you prepare for that endurance?
Yeah. No, it's funny that you mentioned that, Ironman is superhuman, because this niece of mine, I told her that I'm going to Kazakhstan for the Ironman. And, out of shame or out of fear or out of guilt, she didn't ask me, okay, what's Ironman? She assumed that I'm going for some humanitarian expedition where I'm going to be saving hundreds of people. I'm going to be doing some good cause and all. And like later on, she was feeling so guilty. Oh, it's a triathlon event. I didn't know about this. So it's interesting that you asked me, because my Ironman training was very uncharacteristic, very unlike what you heard about your friends. My training was just for 2 months flat, right? I did the Kazakhstan Ironman on 14th of August. June and July, 2 months is where I kind of literally slugged out. In these 2 months, I would have done about 229 kilometers of swimming, 250 kilometers of running, and 850 kilometers of cycling. And this was all during the weekends, right? So my Saturdays were swim plus bike, and Sundays would be a long run. And then later on, I did a brick of bike and run as well, and so on and so forth. But Monday to Saturday, religiously strength training in the gym. And I kind of attribute my overall fitness more to the strength training rather than doing the runs and the swim and the long bike rides, because I've been swimming since I was age 6, right? So swimming was in fact the easiest part for me. I was like, okay, I just need to get my body to do the distance. I don't have a challenge in doing the distance in the swim at all. Bike is something which I had actually started off only during the half Ironman, which I did way back in 2019. That's when I kind of really did a long distance bike ride. And my funda on biking is very clear. It's the machine which is doing the bulk of the work. You spend good money and get a good bike to ensure that it gives you the optimum mileage. I'm not saying that you need to go at a 35 or a 40 kmph. That's for the super duper athletes to do it. I don't want to go to that speed. But if you can clock like 25 to 28 kmph on your bike, you can do the cycling distance. Of course, depends on the terrain as well. So I chose a flat terrain. I was very clear. I'm not like going out and trying to put extra pressure on myself being the first Ironman. So I chose an easy course. It was kind of a canal ride swim. So swim was flat, not very choppy water. The ride was mostly flat with a bit of rolling hills towards the end, somewhere in the middle. And the run was inside a park. Again, it was more flattish in nature, right? So I think the fact that I did strength training, the fact that I did compact 2 months of training where I was like spending all my effort in those weekends totally towards my training and making sure that I'm covering my decent amount of mileage. I think that worked. And of course, nutrition plays a big role. Nutrition plays a big role in the training more than the actual event, because in the actual event, the organizers have lots of stuff around. But when you're training, when you're going for an 8-9 hour bike ride, you need to take everything yourself. And fortunately, I live in Coimbatore here. So, the roads are nice. I get small shanty shops everywhere. I can just pick up a banana. I can pick up a bottle of water. So that way it was very,
Nice.
very convenient. I trained completely by myself. Having a buddy around is always nice, but I didn't and I think that kind of made me prepared, right? And the element that you mentioned about being alone, right? I think being comfortable with yourself is very important in any endurance sport. Yes, you might have a runner
Exactly.
pass by you at, kilometer 36 mark and he might say hi. You might be on a long bike ride for 7-8 hours. You might not see anyone for like 30-40 minutes. Are you okay? Are you going to feel lonely? Are you going to feel sad? Some people rely on music. Some people listen to podcasts or whatever, right? But end of the day, are you comfortable with yourself? That should be like the base case analysis, right? Because what if your headphones stop working? Then you don't have access to music and your bike goes for something happens to your bike, flat tire, or you trip or fall. Are you going to take care of yourself? As long as you are able to take care of yourself, you can be ready for any situation, whether it's running a marathon, whether it's doing an Ironman, or even a mount trek climb. The challenge comes in is where we start looking for support and the quality of support and whether the
Yeah.
support would be around. That automatically shelves down a lot of our plans. Oh, I had planned to go, but my friend is busy, so I decided not to go. I mean, like, it's
Hmm.
so sad, right? I mean, the fact is that you're kind of outrightly calling it out that you don't have confidence on you yourself being comfortable with yourself, right? So I think that in a nutshell is critical in endurance sports, to know yourself, to know your limits, to know where you want to cross your limits, to know how badly what you want, right? That's the key, right? To be able to define the level of desperation or level of limits that you're willing to break. And once you know that, there is
Exactly.
no goal which is difficult to achieve.
So true.
Yeah.
Very, very true. And all this, one of the things that I feel like counts hell of a lot is the support from the family.
Oh, yeah. Very true. Very
Because
true.
if you don't have the family's encouragement, I don't know how I would have done any of the things that I've done if I did not know that, back of there's somebody who's cheering me on, even though they may not be present with me, but
Yeah.
back of the mind, I knew that, they were your biggest cheerleaders
Right.
and they were waiting for you at the finish line.
Okay.
Whether
That's so
it's
important.
imaginary or it's a real finish line, you have your family waiting for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a huge motivation.
Yeah. So, by the time I did my Ironman, I'd probably run about 30, 40 half and full marathons. Never ever had any
Oh,
of
wow.
my family members been with me at the finish line. And I used to have that quiet grudge in my mind for some reason or the other. The Ironman came up. Fortunately, my daughter had a break from college and I told her, look, you're coming with me. She's like, what will I do? You're going to be doing the Ironman. What will I do? I don't have any friends and all. But, after a couple of days, she thought about it and she came back and said, I'm coming. And trust me, Jafar, seeing her at that finish line, waiting with the tricolor, handing over the tricolor, running along with me, holding the phone in hand, and shooting those last few moments of the Ironman were like divine, right? I'm like, okay, all past excuses are pardoned now, right? The fact that you were not there for many races doesn't matter. You were there for the one which was the most important one for me, and it mattered right here. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, fabulous talking to you, Jafar. It's been great experience. I'm sure you have many more exciting journeys and destinations ahead of you. All the very best for the same.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Take care.